She's the one who never quite found herself. My father said it into a microphone, raising his glass to my brother. 300 people. The room laughed. So did I. He'd run our family company for 35 years and decided long ago I was the help. I'd worked there 8 years. I knew the portfolio better than he did. He gave Grant the corner office and gave me table 9 by the kitchen doors. I clapped along. I didn't stand. I didn't correct him. I'd spent 31 years not correcting him. I just reached into my bag, set my phone on the edge of the podium beside his notes, and waited for him to finish his sentence. 6 weeks from then, his name would come off the building. But that night, holding his glass, he still thought he'd won. He'd forgotten the quietest person in that ballroom had been keeping his voice on her phone since December. So let me back up to how I ended up at that table, smiling, with the truth already loaded. The gala was the Halloran Group's 35th anniversary. My father built that company out of a single strip mall in 1991 and never let anyone forget it. By June 2026, it was a regional name. 11 shopping centers, a tower downtown, his face in the business section twice a year. I'd worked there since I was 23. 8 years. I started in leasing, answering phones, driving to vacant units with a clipboard. Nobody handed me anything. Grant came in 4 years after me, straight out of his MBA, and got a corner office with his name on the door in a month. That was the arithmetic of our family. I earned, he received. I was good at the job. I need to say that plainly, because women like me are trained not to. By my late 20s, I knew the portfolio better than anyone in the building, including my father. I knew which centers carried the others. I knew which leases were time bombs. When a tenant threatened to walk, they sent me, not Grant, because Grant made promises and I made deals. Internally, everyone knew. There was a joke at the company. Ask Bryn, she has it, that I heard a dozen times a year. And that was, in its own backhanded way, the only recognition I ever got. They didn't promote the person who had it. They just kept her where they could find her. My mother passed when I was 19. Cancer, fast, 11 weeks from the diagnosis to the funeral. After that, it was the 3 of us, and the 3 of us was really 2 of them and me at the edge of the photo. She was the one who used to look up. I remember that. When I came into a room, my mother's eyes would lift. Such a small thing. I didn't know it was a thing until it was gone, and I spent the next 12 years trying to get my father to do it, not understanding that he didn't have it in him and never had. My father, Walter, was the kind of man who confused being feared with being loved. He'd built something real, and he believed that gave him the right to decide who was real and who wasn't. He decided early. Grant was the future. I was the help. The gala was at the Ardmore Hotel. The big ballroom, chandeliers, a string quartet, a stage with the company logo glowing behind it. 300 guests, investors, bankers, the mayor's chief of staff. Every person who mattered to my father's idea of himself. I was seated at table 9. Not the family table. Table 9, near the kitchen doors, between a regional broker named Felix and an empty chair. Grant was at table 1 with Dad, of course. So was Dad's wife, my stepmother, Diane. I want to be precise about something, because it matters later. I wasn't bitter about the seating. By 31, I'd stopped expecting table 1. What I was, that night, was calm. The kind of calm that should have scared them, because 3 days earlier, I'd made a decision, and the thing in my bag was already there. A waiter refilled my water. Felix leaned over and asked what I did at the company. A little of everything, I said. He smiled like that was charming. He had no idea. Up at the stage, my father tapped the microphone. The room hushed. He looked out over all of it, all those faces, all that proof of himself, and he started to talk about legacy. And that was the first lie of the night, though nobody in that room knew it yet, including me, until I checked my phone under the table and saw the file was still there. Before I take you any further into that ballroom, let me say this. If your stomach already tightened at the words Table 9, if you already know what it feels like to be the one who's there but doesn't count, take a second to like this video and subscribe, because this story finds the people who need it. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I genuinely want to know how far this reaches tonight. I'm Bryn, I'm 31, and what you just heard was only the first crack in something my family had spent years sealing over. So let me get back to that stage, and the speech. To understand why I was so calm, you need one piece of the past, and then I'll bring you right back. When I was 8, I won a regional spelling competition. I came home with a little gold trophy, the cheap kind, plastic dipped in paint. My father was on the phone. I held it up. He covered the receiver and said, "That's nice. Did you take out the trash?" Then he went back to his call. That trophy sat on my dresser for years. The year I moved out, I found it in a box in the garage. Grant's third-grade soccer ribbon was framed on the office wall. My trophy was in a box marked Donate. That's the whole wound in one image. I wasn't asking to be the favorite. I just wanted one time for him to look up. He never did. So somewhere along the way, I stopped asking, and I started doing the math differently. If I couldn't be chosen, I'd be necessary. I'd be the one who knew where everything was. The one nobody could fire because nobody else understood the files. I told myself that was the same as being loved. It is not the same. It took me until that ballroom to know the difference. Back to the present. Because by the spring of 2026, necessary had stopped being a feeling and become a fact in writing on a deal worth more than everything else my father owned. The deal was called Riverside Commons. It was my father's last big swing, a mixed-use development on the old rail yards, the project he wanted his name on forever. Retail, 2 residential towers, a public plaza, the kind of thing that gets your photo on a plaque. He gave it to Grant. Of course he did. Lead developer, Grant Halloran, 33, the prince getting his coronation project. I was assigned to support. "Run the numbers for your brother," Dad said, like I was an intern. I'd been underwriting deals for 6 years. I want to be fair to Grant for one sentence, because the truth is sharper than a cartoon. He's not stupid. He's charming, and he photographs well, and he can hold a room. He just never learned the part of the job that happens when no one's watching. I learned it by necessity. He never had to. For the first month, it was fine. Or it looked fine, which in my family was the same thing. Grant got profiled in the business journal standing in a hard hat at the rail yards. "Halloran Scion bets big on downtown." My father had it framed. I underwrote in the background. "Run the numbers for your brother." By February, Riverside was in trouble. I saw it before anyone said it out loud, because I was the one in the spreadsheets at 11 at night while everyone else was at the holiday parties and the ribbon photos. It started small, a lease projection that didn't match the rent roll. Then a draw request on the construction loan that came in higher than the schedule allowed. I asked Grant about it in the hallway. He waved a hand. Construction's always over. It evens out. It does not always even out. That's a thing people say who've never had to close the books. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. The anchor tenant was wobbling. I could hear it in the way their letters had stopped saying, "We look forward to," and started saying, "We are evaluating." The construction loan had a covenant nobody had read closely, and there was a refinancing deadline in March that Grant kept calling a formality. It was not a formality. If we missed it, the whole loan repriced at a rate that would eat the project's entire margin, and then some, and Riverside went from my father's monument to the thing that took the company down with it. 11 shopping centers, the tower, 35 years. All of it cross-collateralized against this one swing. My father had bet the house. Literally. The original loan was secured against the rest of the portfolio. I flagged it. I sent the email. Calm, specific, 3 bullet points and a deadline. I put it in writing. Twice. The second time, I copied my father. Grant called me 20 minutes later. He didn't say hello. "Why are you CCing Dad on my project?" "Because the bank's going to call the loan," I said. "Grant, the covenant's already breached. They have the right to—" "You don't understand the financing," he said. "Stay in your lane, Bryn. Support means support. It doesn't mean running to Dad behind my back." I heard him breathing. I heard underneath it that he was scared, and that being scared made him meaner, the way it does in the men in my family. "Okay," I said, "it's your project." "Thank you," he said like he'd won something. I stayed in my lane for about a week. Then the bank called the loan. I switched into a different kind of mode after that. Quiet, documented. I didn't go to my father and say, "I told you so." I'd learned a long time ago that being right was not safe in my family. Being right made you a threat. So I did what I always did. I made myself the person who could fix it, and I kept every receipt. That's the part I need you to sit with for a second. Picture being the one who saw the cliff coming, who put it in writing, who got told to stay in your lane, and then watching the people who ignored you start to panic. What would you have done? Helped them? Let them fall? Tell me below. I read them. Here's what I did. I helped them, and I recorded it. The week the loan got called, my father's office turned into a war room. I wasn't invited to it. I want you to understand that. The deal was on fire. I was the only person in the building who'd seen the fire coming, and the meetings happened behind a closed door with Grant and the CFO and a lawyer. And nobody asked me in. I knew what was happening because the CFO, a decent man named Hollis, who was 3 years from retirement and terrified of all of it, kept walking past my desk with the look of someone watching a car roll toward a cliff in slow motion. On the Thursday, Hollis stopped. He glanced back at the closed door. "You flagged this," he said quietly. "In February. I saw the email." "I did," I said. "They're talking about Chapter 11, he said. "Grant doesn't have a plan. He has a tone." He rubbed his face. "I'm too old for this, Bryn." Then he walked away, because that's what people did in that company. They told me the truth in passing and then went back to the room where the decisions got made without me. That night, I went home and I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with the model I'd built, the real one, the one that reconciled and I knew, the way you know a thing in your body before your head agrees, that I could fix it. I knew the moves, the tenant, the participation loan, the covenant cure. I'd been quietly carrying the solution around for a month while they argued behind a door. I also knew that if I fixed it, I'd be doing it for the man who'd put my spelling trophy in a box marked "Donate." I went to bed at 3. I decided to do nothing. Let them call the lawyer, let it be Grant's. For the first time in 8 years, the next part is when he came to find me. Not in person. That would have cost him too much. He called me at home at 9:40 on a Sunday night in December. I let it ring. I watched the screen light up with the word Dad. And I let it ring because I'd told myself I was done. Then I let it go to voicemail. And then I sat on my kitchen floor, actually on the floor, my back against the cabinet, and listened to it 3 times. And I saved it because some part of me already knew it was the most honest thing he would ever say to me. I'm not going to play you the whole thing yet. That's for later, in a room where it matters. But I'll tell you the shape of it. My father's voice on that voicemail was not the voice from the podium. It was thin. It cracked twice. He said my name like it was a rope he was reaching for. He said the bank was going to take Riverside. He said Grant was in over his head. His exact words. He said, and I wrote this down that night so I wouldn't think I'd imagined it, "You're the only one who can fix this. You always could." Then he said the thing I'd waited 23 years to hear, and he said it because he was desperate, not because he meant it kindly. He said, "I should have listened to you. I'll make it right with you. Just save the deal." I sat on that floor for an hour after it ended. Then I got up and I saved the deal. It took 11 weeks. I'm not going to pretend it was simple because it wasn't. The first week was just understanding how bad it was. Grant had been running Riverside out of 3 different spreadsheets that didn't reconcile, plus a folder of emails he never forwarded to anyone. I spent 4 nights at the office after everyone left, putting it into one model, line by line, so I could see the whole thing at once. When I saw it whole, my hands actually went cold. The construction loan had a debt service covenant Grant had blown past in January without noticing. The anchor tenant, a grocery chain that was supposed to be the spine of the retail level, had sent a letter of intent to walk, and the letter had been sitting unanswered in Grant's inbox for 19 days. 19 days. In financing time, that's a year. I made a list. 3 problems, each one big enough to kill the deal: the covenant, the tenant, the March refinancing deadline that would reprice everything if we missed it. I started with the tenant, because a deal with no anchor can't be financed at all. I drove out to their regional office on a Tuesday. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell Grant. I sat across from their real estate VP, a tired woman named Paula, who'd clearly expected to be ignored for another 19 days, and I said, "I read your letter. You're right. We dropped the ball. Tell me what it would take to keep you." She blinked. I don't think anyone at our company had ever opened with that. What it took was a build-out concession Grant had refused to even discuss. He'd called it giving away margin. I ran the number that night. The margin we'd give away was a rounding error against losing the anchor entirely. I gave it away. Paula signed a renewed letter of intent the following Monday. 1 problem down. I didn't tell anyone that either. Then, the financing. I restructured it myself. I went to a regional bank I'd built a relationship with years ago, a relationship my father didn't know existed, because he'd never thought to ask what I did with my time. Their commercial lead, a man named Owen, had done 2 small deals with me when I was still in leasing and nobody else would take his calls. People remember who took their calls. I laid the whole thing on his desk, the good and the bad. I'd learned that much from watching my father do the opposite his entire career. If you hide the bad from a banker, he finds it later and never trusts you again. Owen looked at the model for a long time. "This is salvageable," he said finally. "Barely, but your covenant's still a problem. I can't refinance into a default." So I went after the covenant. I found a credit union willing to take a slice of the construction loan as a participation, enough to cure the covenant breach and get us back inside the lines before the refinancing closed. It took 2 more weeks of phone calls and a personal guarantee structure I had to invent on a legal pad at my kitchen table at 2 a.m. There was one very bad Thursday where the whole thing nearly fell apart. The appraisal came in low, almost 20% under what the refinancing needed. If that number stood, Owen couldn't lend, the participation collapsed, and Riverside died in 11 days. I called Owen. "It's wrong," I said. "The number's wrong." "It's the appraisal, Bryn. I can't lend against a number I want. I lend against the number on the page." "Then give me until Monday to fix the page." He was quiet. "You can't fix an appraisal over a weekend." "Watch me," I said, and hung up, and then sat at my kitchen table and put my head in my hands for exactly 5 minutes, because that was all the time I could afford to fall apart. Here's what was wrong. The appraiser had used the wrong comparable sales. Older centers, smaller footprints, the wrong submarket entirely. I pulled 3 recent sales myself. 2 of them I wasn't sure about, so on Saturday, I drove to both, in the rain, with a clipboard, and walked the parking lots and counted the square footage off the building face the way I had at 23 when I was nobody. Then I wrote the appraiser a 2-page letter. Polite, devastating. Every error numbered. I attached the comps with photos I'd taken myself. He revised it on Monday morning. The number came in where it needed to. Owen called me at 9. "I don't know how you did that," he said. "Appraisers don't move." He didn't move, I said. He was just wrong, and somebody finally showed him. I did it under Grant's name. That was the condition my father set. 3 days into it, once he'd recovered enough to start managing his own image again. "We keep this internal," he said. "Grant's the lead. It looks better for the company. It looks better for the company." That's how he said it. As if the company were a person who had feelings to protect, and I were not. I agreed. I want you to understand why I agreed, because it's the heart of everything. I agreed because I'd spent my whole life believing that if I just did enough, quietly enough, eventually he'd choose me. One more time, I thought. One more save, and he'll finally look up. I was wrong, but I didn't know it yet. There was one moment, during all of it, that I keep. The Tuesday before the close, my father came to my desk after everyone had gone home. He stood there in his coat. He didn't sit. "Owen says it's going to close," he said. "He says you did it." "It's going to close," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "And I swear to you, I thought it was coming." The look up. After 31 years, on a dark Tuesday with the office empty, I thought he was finally going to say it. He said, "Make sure Grant's on the signature page. It's his deal." And he turned and left. I sat there in the empty office for a long time. Then I added Grant to the signature page, because that was the condition and because I'd already decided to keep the rest. I closed the refinancing on that Friday in March. Riverside Commons was alive. My father's monument was saved. The company was solvent. Nobody outside a handful of people knew it had ever been at risk. And every meeting, every email, every signature page, I had it. I'd kept it the way I kept everything. Not because I planned to use it, because keeping things was the only power I'd ever been allowed. For a few weeks after the close, I let myself believe something had changed. My father was almost warm. He stopped by my desk twice. Twice in 1 month, a record. Once he brought me a coffee, set it down without a word, and walked away, like the gesture embarrassed him. I held that paper cup like it was the trophy from when I was 8. That's how starved I was. A lukewarm coffee from a man who couldn't say thank you, and I treated it like proof of love. That's the part of this I'm least proud of. Not the recording, the coffee, how much I still wanted it. The first crack in that came in April, at a board dinner. My father stood up. He always stands up, and lifted his glass. "I want to recognize Grant," he said, "for shepherding Riverside through a very difficult market." Not many young leaders could have held that together. The board clapped. Grant accepted it with a modest nod. The CFO, Hollis, who knew exactly what had happened, stared into his water glass and said nothing, because Hollis was 3 years from a pension, and a man's silence has a price he can afford. I sat there and felt something I didn't have a name for yet. Not anger, exactly. More like the moment you step where the stair should be, and there's no stair. The floor I'd been standing on. The idea that if I just did enough, he'd finally choose me. That floor was never a floor. It was a thing I'd painted on the air. Diane, my stepmother, caught my eye across the table. "She's not warm, Diane. She married my father 11 years ago, and she spent every one of them watching him from a slight distance, like a woman keeping her receipts in a marriage, too. But she's not blind." She gave me a small look that I felt all the way down. Later, by the coat check, she said quietly, "You did that, didn't you? The financing." I didn't answer. I was concentrating very hard on a button. "He knows," she said. "He just won't ever say it where it costs him." She picked up her coat and left. And that one sentence did more damage than the whole speech, because it named the thing I'd been refusing to see. He knew. He'd always known. And knowing had never once been enough to make him choose me. I went home that night and I did something I'd never done before. I made copies of the voicemail. I put one on a second drive. I emailed one to myself. I wrote down the date and time of the original, December the 8th, 9:40 p.m. on a card and put it in my wallet, the way you write down a thing you're afraid you'll talk yourself out of believing. I don't fully know why I did all that, except that I'd stopped believing the truth was safe with only me holding it. Things that only one person knows have a way of becoming things that never happened. That was the night the calm started. The calm you heard at the beginning. It's what's left when hope finally burns off. Then they planned the gala, the 35th anniversary. My father decided it would be the night he formally named his successor. He told the executive team in May. He didn't tell me. I heard it from Felix, the broker, who assumed I already knew. "Big night for your family," Felix said. "Walter's announcing Grant as president. Riverside put him over the top, I hear." Riverside put him over the top. I thanked Felix and walked to the parking garage and sat in my car for 20 minutes without turning it on. I'd saved the company, and the reward for saving it was going to be a public ceremony where my father handed it to the brother who'd nearly lost it in front of 300 people, citing the exact deal I'd rescued under his name. I want to tell you I felt rage. I didn't. Not at first. What I felt was a kind of terrible clarity, like the last lie had finally run out of room. I called the only person in my family who'd ever told me the truth. Diane. I need to ask you something, I said. At the gala, is there a sound system? A connection for the podium mic? There was a long pause. Bryn, she said, what are you going to do? Whatever's right, I said. Will you help me, or do I do it alone? Another pause, longer. There's an AV booth at the back, she said finally. The mic runs through it, and the boy who runs it, I tip him at Christmas. She exhaled. I'll talk to him. God help us both. I want to be honest about the next few days because this is the part where I could have become someone I didn't want to be. I thought about doing it cruelly. I thought about humiliating Grant the way I'd been humiliated. I sat with that for a night and then I let it go because that's his father's instinct, not mine. I didn't want to win the way Walter Halloran wins. I wanted the truth in the room. That's all. Just the truth, out loud, where it couldn't be filed away in a box marked Donate. I also thought, for one long night, about doing it privately. Showing the board the voicemail in a conference room. Quiet, professional, no audience. That's what a reasonable person does. But I'm going to be honest with you, because you've come this far. A conference room is where things go to get managed. I'd watched my father manage rooms my whole life. A private reveal becomes a private negotiation, becomes a private settlement. And 6 months later, there's a press release that says, I transitioned out to pursue other opportunities. And the trophy goes back in the box marked Donate. And the truth becomes a thing 2 lawyers know. I didn't want it managed. I wanted it true, in the open, where it couldn't be filed away. The same room he'd used to make me small was the only room big enough to make it real. So I made a plan that was almost boring in how simple it was. I would not say a word against my brother. I would not make a speech. I would not stand up and accuse anyone. I would let my father say exactly what he intended to say. The whole speech, the toast, every flattering line about Grant, every gentle little knife about me. I'd let the room laugh at me one last time. And then I'd let my father talk to the room himself, in his own voice, on a Sunday night in December, when he thought no one would ever hear. I wouldn't expose him. He'd already done that. I'd just stopped being the only one who'd heard it. I practiced the calm. That sounds strange, but I did. I sat in my car in the company garage, and I imagined the laughter, the toast, the heat climbing my neck, and I taught myself to clap through it, because the whole thing depended on me being able to sit in that humiliation one final time without flinching. Long enough for him to finish, long enough for him to win, so that the fall would be his, and not something I'd snatched. Diane and I met twice before the gala to set it up, both times somewhere my father would never go. Once at a diner near the highway, once in the parking lot of a garden center. I learned more about my stepmother in those 2 conversations than in the 11 years she'd been married to him. He did it to me too, you know, she said in the diner, turning her coffee cup without drinking it. Not the same way, but he has a version of you he's decided is the real one, and he will not update it no matter what you do. I stopped trying around year 4. She looked at me. You're a slower learner than I am. I mean that kindly. Why help me then? I asked. You could just leave. You don't owe me anything. She thought about it for a real moment, which I respected, because I watched him do it to a kid, she said. And I sat at table 1 and said nothing, for 11 years. The same as your mother probably did, the same as everyone. I'm tired of being someone who sat at table 1 and said nothing. That was the most honest thing anyone in that family had said to me in a decade. Diane confirmed the AV booth on the Wednesday. The kid would take the file from her phone and cue it to the main speakers, ready to play on my cue. She handed me back my drive in the hotel lobby like we were doing a drug deal, both of us pretending to admire the flower arrangement on the lobby table. "You're sure?" she said. "No," I said, "but I'm done not being sure." She almost smiled. "Your mother would have liked you," she said. "She didn't get the chance to." He made sure of that too. That was the closest thing to an alliance I'd ever had in that family. The night of the gala, I got there early. I told myself it was to check the booth. The truth is, I couldn't sit at home with it. The ballroom was still half set when I arrived. Staff were folding napkins into shapes. The company logo glowed on the stage behind a podium that hadn't been mic'd yet. I stood at the back for a minute and looked at the room the way my father would look at it. 300 chairs, a machine for telling everyone how to feel about him. And I understood, finally, that he'd built his whole life as a stage. Even his children were props on it. Grant was a leading man. I was scenery. I checked the booth myself. The kid, his name was Marcus, 19. Terrified, a college student the hotel hired for events, showed me the cue on his board. One button, Diane's file was loaded under a label that just said Toast Clip, which I appreciated, because it meant if anyone glanced at his screen, they'd assume it was part of the program. "Just so I'm clear," Marcus whispered, even though we were alone. "Mrs. Halloran told me to, right? Because she signs the—" "She told you to," I said, "and whatever happens, you did nothing wrong. You played a file an executive's wife handed you at a corporate event. That's your whole job." He nodded, not reassured. I made him play me the first half-second, just to hear my father's voice come through those big speakers, just to know it would work. "Bryn, it's Dad." 2 words, and then I had him cut it. It filled the empty ballroom like a ghost. It worked. I had him reset it to the top. Then I went out and found my seat. Table 9, near the kitchen doors, the empty chair beside me. I smiled at Felix when he arrived and asked about his kids. I drank water, not wine, because I wanted to remember every single second of it, and I have. Every one. The evening rolled out exactly as my father designed it. Dinner, a plated thing nobody really ate, a video about the company's history with sweeping music and old photos of the original strip mall. The mayor's chief of staff said a few words about partnership and the future of downtown. I watched my father work the room between courses. He moved table to table like the room was a deal he was closing. And in a way, it was. A hand on a shoulder here. A laugh at table 3. He stopped at table 1, the longest, of course, with Grant. And I watched the 2 of them from across the ballroom. The matching suits, the matching way they leaned back when they laughed. And I thought about how good they both were at the part of this that happened where people could see. He didn't come to table 9. He passed within 10 feet of it on his way back to the stage, and his eyes went over me the way your eyes go over a fire exit sign. Registered, not seen. Grant did glance at me, once. We held it for a second. I couldn't read it then. Later, I'd understand it was a question he didn't have the words for yet. And then, at 9:15, the lights came up on the stage, and my father took it for the main event. He talked about 1991, the strip mall, the loan he took against his house. He talked about building something that would outlast him. The room loved it. He was good at this. I'll give him that. He was always good at this. Then he turned to the family table. 35 years, he said, and the question every founder faces. Who carries it forward? He looked at me first. I'll never forget that. He looked at me first, and he smiled, and he said it. My daughter, Bryn. A warm pause. He smiled down at me the way you smile at a child who tried. She's the one who never quite found herself. Bless her. She's been with us a long time. Loyal. We give her that. The laughter started gentle and grew. Felix chuckled beside me, then caught himself, then chuckled again because everyone else was. I felt the heat climb my neck. The old heat, the spelling trophy heat, 8 years old with a plastic trophy and a man covering the phone. I clapped along. I smiled. I had practiced this exact moment in my car, and I want to tell you the practice held. Mostly. My hands were steady. Inside, something was very still and very cold, the way a lake is still, right before it takes the weight off the ice. I did not stand, and I did not cry, and I did not run. 23 years of not doing those things, and I'd never been so glad of the training as I was in that 1 minute. But every company needs a steady hand on the wheel, my father went on, turning to Grant, lifting his glass. And I'm proud to name, tonight, the son who carries this name, the man who brought Riverside Commons home, as the next president of the Halloran Group, my son, Grant. The room rose, 300 people on their feet. I stood up, not to object. The room read it as the daughter finally rising to applaud the son, and a few people near me smiled at me, encouraging, like I was being a good sport at last. I let them think it. I walked toward the stage. My father was still beaming out at the crowd, glass raised. I reached into my bag, took out my phone, and set it on the corner of the podium as I passed. Close enough to touch the edge of his notes, screen up, dark. He glanced down at it, then at me, and for half a second his face did something complicated, some animal recognition that he couldn't name in time. "Bryn?" he said off mic, a flicker of a question. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, past the podium, past the family table, past Grant, to the back of the ballroom. My heart was going so hard, I could feel it in my fingertips. 300 people, and the only sound that mattered to me was the small click my own shoes made on the parquet. I reached the back. Marcus was at the booth, white-knuckled. Diane was beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder, calm as a Sunday. I gave Marcus the smallest nod of my life. And that's the moment the night stopped being my father's. Here's what I want you to do for 1 second before I tell you what came out of those speakers. Picture it. 300 people standing for your brother. Your father glowing. And you, at the back of the room, with one finger lifted toward a teenager in a booth. What my father said last winter, when he thought it would die in my phone forever, was about to fill every speaker in that ballroom. I'd carried it for 6 months. Now 300 people were going to carry it with me. The applause was still going when the first words came over the main speakers. It was my father's voice. Bigger than life, filling the ballroom from every corner, the way his speaking voice had filled it 2 minutes before. But it wasn't the speaking voice. It was the other one, the thin one. "Bryn, it's Dad. Pick up. Please pick up." The applause sputtered. People sat back down, confused, looking at the stage, looking at the speakers, looking at my father, who had gone very still with his glass still raised. That was the lie, hanging in the air. The man who brought Riverside Commons home. And here came the first piece of evidence, in his own mouth. The bank called the loan on Riverside, the whole thing. If we don't fix the refinancing by March, we lose it. And if we lose it, the company doesn't survive it. I'm not... A breath, a crack. I'm not exaggerating, Bryn. This sinks us. My father set his glass down, hard. He leaned into the live microphone and said, "Turn that off. Marcus, turn it off." That was the denial, right on schedule. But Marcus didn't turn it off, because Diane was standing at the back with her hand on the boy's shoulder, and the recording kept going. And here came the stronger evidence. Grant's in over his head. He doesn't see it. He keeps calling it a formality, and it is going to bury us. I can't put him on this. I need you. You're the only one who can fix this, Bryn. You always could. The room had gone completely silent now. 300 people. The string quartet had stopped. Somewhere a fork touched a plate and it sounded like a bell. My father reached for the podium with both hands. His face was the color paper goes when it's been left in the sun. And then the recording delivered the last reveal, the one I'd carried on my kitchen floor in December, the one I'd written down so I wouldn't think I dreamed it. I should have listened to you. Years ago I should have listened. I'll make it right with you. I swear to God I will. Just save the deal. Save us. I'm asking you. I'm asking my daughter to save us." Then the click, then nothing. The silence after it was the loudest thing I've ever heard. I watched it land on 300 faces in real time. The banker at table 2, the one whose institution held the master loan against the whole portfolio. He had gone very straight in his chair, and he was looking at my father the way you look at a man who's just told you he hid something from you. The mayor's chief of staff had her phone out, flat on the table, not filming, just there, the way you keep your hands near a door. Felix, beside me, had stopped breathing. And Grant. Grant was staring at the speakers, like they'd said his own name in a language he almost understood. The waiter who'd refilled my water stood frozen against the wall with a coffee pot and didn't move for a full minute. I noticed that. You notice strange, small things in the biggest moments of your life. For 3 seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then it broke, and it broke the way ice breaks, not all at once, but in lines, spreading. A board member at table 2 turned to the man beside him and said, not quietly enough, "Grant brought Riverside home?" That was the silence ending. Here came the loss of control. My father did what my father always does when the ground moves. He attacked. "That's doctored," he said into the microphone, and his courtroom voice was gone. The founder's voice was gone. What was left was high and tight. "That's edited. She edited that. Bryn." He found me at the back of the room and pointed, the way he'd pointed at a defendant in a story I'd heard 100 times. "My daughter is unstable. She's always been jealous of her brother. This is a stunt. Security." "Walter." Diane's voice from the back, clear and cold. "It's not edited. I have the original. You left it on her phone at 9:40 on December the 8th. I checked the date myself." The room turned to look at his own wife. And then, this is the part I didn't plan, the part I couldn't have planned, Grant stood up at table 1. Everyone expected him to defend his father, to smooth it over. He was always the smoother. Instead, my brother stood there with 300 people watching, and his face just gave way. Years of it, all at once. He looked at our father, and he said, loud enough to carry, "Is it true?" Walter turned on him. "Sit down." "Is it true?" Grant said again. "Did she fix Riverside? Did you let me? You let me stand up here. You let me take it." His voice cracked on it. "You told me I closed it. You told everyone I closed it." "I made you," Walter said. And that was the greed finally showing its face in front of every witness in the room. "Both of you. Everything either of you has, I built it. I decide whose name is on it. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked." Hollis, the CFO, stood up at table 4, quietly. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood, the way you stand when you've decided you're done sitting, and he set his napkin on the table. "Walter," he said. His voice shook, but it carried. "She closed the refinancing on the 14th of March. I countersigned the wire. Grant wasn't in the building that week." He looked around the room, at the board, at the bankers. "I should have said something in April. I didn't. I'm saying it now." Then he picked up his coat and walked out, 3 years from his pension, and didn't look back. That was the moment the room's weight moved. You could feel it physically, like a boat shifting under your feet. My father saw it move, and like every man who has only ever known how to push, he pushed harder. "He's covering for her," Walter said into the mic, pointing at the door Hollis had just left through. "They've cooked this up together. This is a coup. My own daughter, my own CFO." His voice climbed. "Do you know what I gave this family? Do you have any idea what I sacrificed? And this is—" "Dad." Grant's voice, raw. "Stop talking, please, for once." Walter turned on him, and for a second, I saw something I'd never seen. My father genuinely shocked because the one person who had always taken his side, the prince, the chosen one, had just told him to stop. "You let me take it," Grant said again, quieter now, almost to himself. "You let me stand up here in front of everyone I know." "I gave you a gift," Walter snapped. "You gave me her work," Grant said. "And you knew." And there it was. Out loud, in front of the bankers and the board, and the mayor's chief of staff and his own son. My father, telling the whole room that the truth was whatever he assigned, and his golden child, telling him, finally, that it wasn't. Nobody laughed this time. I think I held my breath through the whole of it, because what happened next is the part I still can't believe I got to see. It was Felix who started it. The broker at my table, the man who'd asked me earlier what I did, and decided it was charming when I said, "A little of everything." He'd put it together now. He stood up, looked toward the back of the room, found me, and started to clap. Slow at first, alone. One man clapping in a silent ballroom is almost unbearable to hear. Then the woman next to him stood. Then a man at table 3 I didn't know. Then half of table 2, including, and I will never forget this, the banker, the one whose institution held the master loan, who stood and clapped while looking directly at my father, which is the most expensive thing I have ever seen one man do to another with his hands. It moved across the ballroom like wind across a field. People getting to their feet, turning their chairs, turning their bodies away from the stage and toward the back of the room. Toward me. Toward table 9, by the kitchen doors, the seat my father had given me to make a point. The point got made, just not his. I want to tell you, I stood there in triumph. I didn't. I stood there, and I felt my eyes sting, and I let one tear go. Just one, because for the first time in my entire life, a room full of people was looking up at me. And the person who was supposed to look up first, the only one who ever mattered, was the only one who wouldn't. He chose Grant. He'd always chosen Grant. I just hadn't let myself say it until I was watching him do it one final time, with the whole truth on the table, and he still couldn't say my name without it tasting like a loss. That was the wound. Said out loud, finally, in my own head, in that ballroom, I was never going to be chosen by him. And I was going to have to be the one to choose myself. My father stood at the podium while the room applauded his daughter, and he did not move, and he did not speak, and the glass he'd raised to my brother sat on the podium, untouched, going warm. If you've ever had to stop waiting for one person's approval to feel like you were allowed to exist, I'd love to hear what finally set you free. Tell me below. The aftermath was faster and quieter than you'd think. Most reckonings are. The board met within the week. The named announcement, Grant as president, was never finalized. It died on that stage. 2 board members had been at table 2, close enough to hear my father say, "I decide whose name is on it, and that sentence does specific damage to investor confidence when it comes out of a CEO at his own anniversary gala in front of the bank that holds his master loan." The bank, by the way, asked for a meeting that Monday, not a friendly one. When your borrower stands up in public and reveals he hid a near default from his own board, the people who lent against his entire portfolio would like to understand what else they don't know. I sat in that meeting. My father did not. The board sent me, because I was the only person who could walk the bank through every line of what had actually happened, because I was the one who'd done it. Owen, my banker, the one who'd taken my calls back when I was nobody, was in that room on the other side of the table. At the end, he shook my hand and said low, "You should have been running this place years ago." It was the first time anyone with authority had said that to me out loud. I didn't cry in the meeting. I cried in the elevator, alone, where no one could give me the look. By July, my father had agreed to step back as CEO into a founder emeritus role. His choice, the press release said. Nobody who was in that ballroom believed it was his choice. His name stayed on the lobby for a while, and then quietly it didn't. 6 weeks after the gala, they took the lettering off the tower. I didn't go watch. I heard about it from Felix, who texted me a photo of the workman and 3 exclamation points, which I think was his way of being kind. Grant and I are not close. I won't pretend the gala fixed us. 33 years doesn't undo in a night. But he came to my office a few days after, stood in the doorway the way he used to stand in our father's, hands in his pockets, and said, "You should have let me drown." "No," I said. "I shouldn't have let him use both of us. That's different." He looked at the floor. "He told me I closed it," he said. "I think part of me knew I didn't. I think I let myself believe it because believing it was easier than what believing the other thing meant about me." He laughed, with no humor in it. "Turns out, the version of me Dad sold the room was a guy who couldn't even read his own loan docs." "The version of you Dad sold the room," I said, "was a guy who never had to. That's on him too. He never made you learn it. He just made you the face of it." He nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand it yet. But here's the thing. He's working now. Actually working. He asked me to walk him through the Riverside model line by line, and he stayed until midnight, and he took notes. For the first time in his life, nobody was handing him anything. We'll see what he does with that. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not holding the door shut either. My father called me once. I almost didn't answer. I thought, even then, after all of it, that maybe this was the call. Maybe now. He said, "You humiliated me in front of everyone I know." I waited. I waited for the rest of it. The part where he says he's sorry, where he says he sees me. I'm still waiting. "No, Dad," I said finally. "You did that in December. I just stopped keeping it for you." He hung up. I haven't heard from him since. The board asked me to take over Riverside Commons. Officially. My name, my project, my files, in the open. Then, a month later, they asked me to take the operating chief role for the whole company, while the search for a new CEO ran. And 3 months after that, the search quietly ended because the board had figured out what the building had always known. Ask Bryn, she has it. I said yes. I said yes on one condition, that they put it in writing. The whole history of Riverside. What happened? What went wrong? Who saw it? Who fixed it? And under whose name it was filed and why. I wanted it in the corporate record, signed, permanent. No more saving things in the dark. I was done with the dark. If my name was going to mean something at that company, it was going to mean it on paper, where it couldn't end up in a box. I framed one thing for my new office. Not the trophy. I'd thrown that out years ago, in the same box my father once tried to donate it in, which I've decided is a kind of poetry. I framed a single page, the refinancing close statement from that Friday in March, with the date on it, the wire confirmation, and my own signature. Some people framed diplomas. I framed proof that I was the one holding it up. Diane and I have dinner now, once a month, at the diner near the highway, the one she picked back when we were planning. She divorced my father in the fall, quietly on her own terms, the way she does everything. She told me over pie that the gala wasn't why. "It just stopped costing me anything to leave," she said. "You took the last thing he had that I was afraid of." She was right about my mother, too. I'm trying to be the kind of person my mother would have gotten to like. My father called the office once after that, asking to be put back on the Riverside marketing materials. His name, his legacy, the founder's photo. The board referred the request to me, which I think they enjoyed. I said no. Not out of revenge, because the materials are supposed to tell the truth now, and his name on that project would have been one more lie, and I'm out of room for those. Some mornings, I drive past the old rail yards where Riverside is going up. There's a crane against the early sky, and the first tower frame, steel against the morning, and a sign with the project name on it by the gate. My father's name isn't anywhere on that sign. Mine isn't either yet, and that's fine. I stop the car sometimes and just look at it for a minute before work. The building doesn't need a name on it to know who held it up. It stands because the math was right, because the tenant stayed, because somebody read the loan documents at 2 a.m. Buildings don't care about toasts. They care about whether the person who built them told the truth about the foundation. I spent 31 years believing that if I were necessary enough, I'd finally be chosen. I had it backwards. You don't get chosen into your own worth. You just stop handing the pen to people who keep writing you out. I'm Bryn Halloran. I built something real, and this time, I'm the one who gets to say so.